Welcome back, Science 10. This is the Section 1.5 Ecology assignment that is part of the CD3 booklet. So what I'm going to do is just kind of go through the highlights, explain anything that I think may need further explanation, and inform me what questions I would like you to do. So ecology, first of all, talks about being stung by a wasp, etc., etc., and how a wasp is considered a pest because as human beings we look at wasps as being something that causes a problem for us. So why don't we just eliminate all pests rather than just control their numbers? Well, there's reasoning behind that. So if we just look through here, imagine a world without flies, mosquitoes, termites, caterpillars, etc. At first it might be appealing, but consider how organisms might be affected. For example, some fish and amphibians eat mosquitoes, of course. Eat mosquito larvae for food. The elimination of mosquitoes would have a devastating effects on lakes. In addition, adult mosquitoes are an important food source for swallows, robins, and small birds. So even though we look at them as being undesirable, they are part of the food chain and also food webs. So if we eliminated all wasps, it would affect animals higher up on that food chain. Some other insect pests are needed by plants. Most plants rely on insects for pollination. So those insects come and they spread pollen from one area to another. So they are beneficial that way. Plants also benefit from insects like the wasp that help decompose tissue of dead plants and animals, returning nutrients to the soil. Many of the insects we call pests also dig around plants, loosening the soil and allowing oxygen to get into roots. And of course, if oxygen gets into roots, those plants will grow that much better. Even garden weeds like crabgrass serve as an important purpose. Outside the garden, these rapidly growing plants are an important food source for many animals. Eliminate wild grasses, and cattle, sheep, and other grass animals would soon be extinct because they rely on that. The long fibrous roots of these hardy, fast-growing plants also pump nutrients back into the soil surface where they can be used by more delicate domestic plants. The greatest benefits of these plants might be their ability to grow along cliffs and in other precarious locations. Here they anchor the soil, preventing erosion. So we can see things that we view as pests, they actually have a part to play. Organisms interact within ecosystems. To better understand living things, scientists must put aside the idea of pests and examine organisms within their natural settings. Ernst Haeckel, a German biologist, first coined the word ecology in 1866 to describe the study of how organisms interact with each other. Okay, so we look at living organisms, how they interact with each other. That is referred to as ecology. Ecology combines the Greek word oikos, meaning the place where one lives, with logos, meaning the study of. So the studying of living things and how they interact with each other. Ecological studies can begin at the level of a single organism. Investigations might be designed to determine how the individual interact with the environment and how factors in the environment affect its growth, feeding habits, and reproduction. So how does that determine how that organism can survive? Non-living factors or influences on an organism, such as the amount of sunlight, temperature, and strength and direction of wind, are called abiotic. So those are non-living factors or influences on organisms. For example, the sunlight, temperature, etc. Factors caused by the presence and roles of living things are biotic. Bio implies living. So living factors that affect an ecosystem, non-living factors that affect an ecosystem. And of course, organisms do not live in isolation. Organisms usually group with other of the same species. All of the members of the same species living in the same ecosystem or habitat are referred to as a population. So you could have a population of people, a population of ants, population of mice, etc. All of the same species are referred to as a population. Since there is usually more than one species in an ecosystem, there are also more than one types of population. The collection of all the populations of all the species in an ecosystem or habitat is called the community of the organisms. So ants interacting with mice, interacting with certain plants, etc., that would consist of a community. A community in the lake might include populations of pike, perch, tadpoles, mosquitoes, etc. When studying a community, an ecologist would study how biotic factors affect each population. For example, an ecologist studying a forest community might examine the interactions between different types of plants and animals. Ecologists can extend their study beyond the community of organisms to the physical environment. When they do so, they begin investigating ecosystems. An ecosystem includes the community of living things and the environment around it. For example, in studying a forest ecosystem, an ecologist could examine how much sunlight reaches the forest floor and what effect that has on plants and animals that live in that ecosystem. Tones and Biodiversity. Ecosystems rarely have sharp boundaries. An organism can move back and forth from one ecosystem to another. There's often gray area between ecosystems where organisms from both ecosystems interact with each other. These transition areas are called ecotones. So those transition areas between types of ecosystems are called ecotones. So if you look back at this diagram, here we have a pond, here we have a field. So in between there is the region from pond to field or from field to pond. The transition. So you know it's not a sharp boundary, it's a general area that leads from one to the other. And of course it says here, since that area will contain species from both of the systems, they often contain a greater biodiversity. And by biodiversity we mean what types of species, how many, and the type of species. So we'd have the most species in that area there because it would have species from both the pond area and the field area intermingling together. So the greater biodiversity, the greater number and difference of species. Ecosystems with greater biodiversity are less fragile. For example, if a predator has to rely on a single food species, if that single food species died out, that predator would die, of course. So predator relies on many prey. So the more prey there are, the greater that whole system will remain intact. Okay? So that's the first part there, relatively easy. So I'd like you to do question 1, define what ecology means, list 4 biotic and 4 abiotic factors in a freshwater system such as a lake and a terrestrial one such as a forest. So you should be able to do that. Describe how a population differs from a community, maybe give some examples. Describe how an ecosystem differs from a community, and again give some examples. We discussed those here. Predict whether you would find more species in a forest, an open field, or the region in between the two, a forest grassland ecotone. I just talked about that, so you should be able to handle that. And this last one I'm going to get you to do as well. So here we have a graph that shows the population inside a beaker of a single-cell organism. So you can see as time goes by what happens to the population. We have a second beaker. Its population looks like this as time goes on. So the existence of that single-cell organism, you have to describe it. And then we put both beakers together and something interesting happens. Paramecia number 1 experiences this growth rate, and being in the same beaker as that, this paramecium experiences this growth rate. So you have to talk about that and have a possible explanation as to what's going on there. Okay, so there you have it. That's the first section, 1.5 in the booklet CD3. See you again.